Namaste.
Namaste.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
That's an inside joke. Inside jokes aren't good, which is why I'll explain to you, and anybody who's even watching when this airs on the internet for the first time and hasn't heard the story, it bears repeating, even though it's a rerun for some of you, and why there's a little greenery around Jesus and Mary and the very blonde Jesus. Yes. I was so afraid that somebody was going to walk in who'd never been here, as we were clowning a little bit with semi-liturgical dance, because it goes back to the first semi-traditional church I served, and they had this very late 1960s, early 1970s conception of what was contemporary. Problem was, I started there in 1999. And so, and they did not perceive that there was sort of this rupture in the space-time continuum that hovered over their space. And for the Christmas service, we used the church, one of the Methodist churches in Waukesha, and the family would come back, and it was Christmas Eve, and everybody's kids would come back, and the grandkids would come back, and there was, at the beginning, the processional song was always O Come Emmanuel, which I put on here this year. And you can imagine my horror, and there's a picture of it that I would keep promising to find and bring in. Because there was this box of 9 people. There'd be 3 rows of 3. And the person in the middle had a candle that was not lit, a pillar candle. And somehow the other 8 had artificial roping that formed a box around the candle. And as the song would play, when they got to the Rejoice, Rejoice, they would lift up this artificial roping and rotate in a circle, and then lower it. And the walking was very dramatic, sort of that British wedding walk, where it's one foot and then the other, and you always lead with the same foot. And I'm watching this being, schooled in the Anglican tradition where liturgy is done well, and everything has a reason behind it. And this thing is making its way toward the altar, and I was supposed to light the middle candle. So I walked out, and I couldn't reach the middle candle because there was this box of people around it. And I had to say to the lovely man with the middle candle, I can't reach you. And it did occur to me briefly at the time that a flamethrower may have been apropos and solved a whole lot of problems at once. Melted all the greenery and lit the candle. And over the years, every year there was some other comedy of errors with this greenery, which they would put somewhere and afterwards, and it was, I have nightmares about it to this day. And so Peg was nice enough to bring in some greenery. And then as she was dancing with it, I thought, oh my God, if somebody walks in who's never been here, they're going to run. So I started reading, and there is a problem because Jesus, of course, very Jewish looking, blonde hair, probably, his eyes are closed. Neither Mary nor Joseph look very Jewish looking, and if you paid attention to the second reading, apparently only one of the shepherds has made it. But the wise men / magi / whatever you want to call them are even more in the East now as they're hanging out with Buddha on top of the refrigerator. And so the Anglican in me dies hard. There still has to be, even in this space, there can be a reason for what you do. And I'm reading a book by Diana Butler Bass called Grounded. And I just started it last night on my new Nook. Well, it's not my new Nook. See, I have this strategy. If I can convince Erin to get a new Nook, I can get her old one.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So
Who has your old one?
I have a couple Nooks if you're interested.
Oh.
But Diana Butler Bass in this book apparently is trying to say what it is that contemporary people, younger people than probably all of us, are looking for, and why institutional religion isn't giving it to them. And she starts the book by posing this shift, and I think she's right as I thought about it, that years ago we would ask, why would God let that happen? And I thought of, although I was just a babe in swaddling cloths myself, why did God let Lee Harvey Oswald shoot President Kennedy? Why would God allow that to happen? That was the question. And depending on your politics, the same question could have been asked on one side or the other of the Reagan attempted assassination. Why did he try, or why in the world did God let him only use a .22? But it was still that same question, why? And why did God allow the Challenger to blow up? And why does God allow children to starve? And why in the world didn't these people see that if Quirinius was governing Syria, once again, here's those Syrians.
Yeah.
Right? But Diana Butler Bass says the question has shifted from why did God to where is God? So instead of why did God allow Sandy Hook to happen, where is God where was God when Sandy Hook happened? Which seems like what my undergrad theology advisor used to call a distinction without a difference. But I don't think it is. I think it's an important difference. Because if you're saying, why did God allow this to happen? What you're assuming is that God was present, that whatever you think of God, God had the ability to stop it if God would have chosen to stop it. And if God didn't choose to stop it, then God must have wanted it to happen. And what does that say? Where was God is a whole different question. On one level, if God is somehow absent, that has implications way beyond whatever tragedy it is we're trying to sort out. Because if God didn't show up for Columbine or the Aurora Theater or the Twin Towers, the Sikh Temple, and I know it's the Sikh Temple, but I just don't like the way that sounds. It sounds like I'm saying something I'm not saying, so I intentionally mispronounced that, but no disrespect intended to the Sikhs. Yeah, the Sikhs. Because if I say the Sikh people, that sounds, I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet. So, but where was God when that happened? Because what we're worried about is, where will God be when it happens to me?
Is it like abandonment?
Yeah, it's like a huge cosmic abandonment issue, right? Because if God wasn't there for that horrible thing, on some level, will God bother to be there for my piddling things? And will God be there for my horrible things? But it really does reflect a whole different field of opportunity. Because if what I'm worried about is why did the Christian God allow that to happen? Now I've taken my God image and narrowed it down. Well, because the Christian God might allow that to happen because the Christian God, as we've heard very frequently lately, is not the same God as the Muslim God, even unless you read a Bible. Or, it can become this battle of competing theologies. Well, God let that happen because this God was mad because you didn't pay attention to this God enough and you should have paid attention to that God. Whereas, if we start to ask, where was God when this happened? It allows us to consider the possibility that God is everywhere. So as I was driving my grandkids yesterday, I picked them up. They live in Shorewood, and they're 5 and not quite 7. And drove them to our house almost in New Berlin, and somehow God came up. I don't know why. Well, if God is in the sky, then they asked, and Jesus is on the ground. But now Jesus is in the sky. And it's this attempt to locate, right? Where is safety? Where is the guy that's really looking out for me, or the woman that's really looking out for me? And I tried to explain that God is everywhere. And I tried to approach it because the sky goes all the way to the ground. Well, it's a little too abstract for 5 and 7. And what we've learned is that while we used to think that adults automatically develop into abstract thinking, was Erik Erikson's first thought. Erik Erikson's better thought was that not necessarily. And so we can start to see, first of all, why it is that some people struggle with the more universalist perspective that says divinity is everywhere. And the nativity, the birth of Christ, says, or the birth of this Christ, I will say, not the, the Christ that this statue represents, means that the creation is chock full of divinity, that there's nowhere you can go and not find divinity, including in ourselves, and including, perhaps most clearly, in those people we struggle the most to believe that divinity is present within them. And that's the where question. And that's why I think it's become culturally important. Because we may not have an answer to why did God allow this to happen. But we've wrestled with the question long enough that at the very least, some people have been able to say, we're not going to figure that one out. So here's a better question. Where was God when this happened? And I believe the answer is everywhere. And I believe the whole thing about the incarnation is an attempt to get us to see that. And every tradition has tried to get us to see that. But we know that sometimes, at least I know that, speaking just for myself, I know that sometimes I do things that really aren't the best choices in the world. And so I struggle with the idea that maybe that's true in me all the time. And I think we all have those moments. And that's okay. There's a process in sorting that out. And when that's your question, if I tell you that there was never a census, which is true, there's no record of a census, it just doesn't matter. If it turns out that Jesus was born in Nazareth and not in Bethlehem, it just doesn't matter. Because we are no longer trying to argue for the legitimacy of Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. We're trying to figure out where God is. And so we can hold some of those other things that aren't so central to our question loosely. And also hold loosely this developing idea of what we all really wonder is, are we okay? Is it okay in the end? Am I as safe as I can be? Can I trust my judgment? And all of those are where is God questions. And to me, in 2015, that's what Christmas is about.